culture is an exciting topic for us, I think, because it's the buzzword that everyone is talking about nowadays. And if you come to our South Portland offices, if you come to the new Press Herald corporate space, you walk in the main entrance and on the wall, it says, "We are a powerful force for good." That is our mission. And in order for that mission to be reflected and to come alive, each department has a different interpretation of what that means. So in the newsroom, it means we put a priority on public service and watchdog journalism. In advertising, it means they're big advocates for their clients, where they try to craft campaigns that get the message to the targeted audience and produces success for those clients. In circulation, you'd make a print product, you better have it on their doorstep at 6 in the morning, because your subscribers are looking for that information and insight and analysis. They want their funnies, the crossword puzzle, all of that. And they want it there early in the morning. And so for our circulation folks, that's the way they're a powerful force for good. And even an event like this, in my mind, this is just a different way to deliver journalism. You get really smart people with insight and experiences to share, and then you bring them into a forum, so it's sort of a three-dimensional way of getting news and information to a subscriber base. And I'm assuming, of course, that you are all subscribers. So that's how our mission statement plays out at the Press Herald. But where that statement becomes a living and breathing dynamic in your company, that happens in HR. That's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where the policies and the practices that you adopt, that's where they come to roost. And so it used to be HR was primarily a place where you would clear paperwork for new hires and you would sign people up for benefits. You would intervene if an employee had some kind of a personal or professional crisis. Or you would champion things like your United Way campaign and your wellness programs. But now HR has taken on a whole different role. And part of what is pushing that is we are in an extraordinary run of unemployment rates here in the state of Maine. For any of you who have attended our previous forums where we talk about workforce, you've heard this before, but it bears repeating. We are in the 45th successive consecutive month of having an unemployment rate below 4%. And in Cumberland County, it's below 3%. And we also have some pretty significant demographic headwinds. We've got more people dying than being born in this state. We have more people retiring from the workforce than entering it. So if you're interested in hiring people, or you want to keep the good people you have right now, you really need to be paying attention to culture. And culture is just a way that your company becomes a place people want to work. One of the good things about this issue, and something that our panelists will explore, is that it doesn't cost a ton of money to develop and create and maintain a good culture in your company. A lot of Maine's 40,000+ businesses are small operations. The business owner is also the HR department, is also the PR department, usually does the custodial work, and it goes on and on and on. So that's one of the things I find most exciting about this topic, is it's a mindset. And it's a dedication to sort of turning what had been the old dynamic of, I have a job, I'm going to advertise, and then I'm going to get to pick among these applicants who I want to bring on board. The power really rests with those job seekers now. And so your mentality needs to reflect that in terms of how you go about hiring people and keeping them happy. So to talk about that, I've got a great panel. Let me introduce them, and then we'll get right to work. To my immediate left is Angela Hansen. Angela is with KMA Associates. That's an HR consultancy here in Greater Portland. She comes with about 25 years of experience in HR and has worked previously with a bunch of different healthcare companies. And I was really happy about that because we've got a lot of people in the room who are coming from healthcare companies. And so she may have some specific advice for you folks. Next to Angela is Cynthia Murphy. Cynthia is a senior program director of workforce at Coastal Enterprises. I know probably everyone in the room knows CEI and the great programs they offer and resources they have for economic development and for businesses here. She has a particular specialty in creating a strategy that delivers a competitive advantage for companies. And so she works with a lot of smaller employers, and she has some great stories to share where there have been tremendous successes with businesses that make a commitment to their culture. And then next to Cynthia is David Pease. So David is the Senior Vice President at Bangor Savings Bank and the Director of Talent and Diversity and Inclusion. And he told me he would be easy to pick out this morning because of his shoes and his shirts. I said, you don't strike me as a typical banker. So David has really focused a lot on culture and what it means and to create a vibrant workplace where people are happy. They get up in the morning, they're happy to come to work. He also has a long career in HR and has worked for other financial institutions and also some healthcare organizations. So I don't know, we have something like 75 years of experience here, and so I think we have an opportunity to all learn something. So let me begin. We have some questions that I shared with the panelists in advance, and several of you submitted questions when you registered for the event this morning, and so we have those as well. And then we'll have the last 15 minutes of this morning we'll set aside for Q&A from the audience. And if you do have a question, it would be great if you could use the microphone. We record these and then we post an audio of them on our website after the fact, and it's so much better when we can hear the questions from the audience and so you understand the context for the answers. So first, I'm going to ask the panelists if they could please define what they mean by workplace culture, and what do you assess when you're determining your culture? I mean, how do you look at it? How do you get an appraisal of, well, what kind of culture do we have? And what kind of culture do you want to create? And so I'm going to just begin with that question with Angela.
Thank you. Thank you. Ooh. I'm going to try this. So workplace culture, yeah, it sounds like such a mysterious topic, doesn't it? Really, it is the unspoken behaviors, mindsets, feelings, things that people feel, say, and do in your company. And you can hear me okay, right? Yes, okay. Hi. So how do you assess what's going on with that? Well, I would say ask. Just ask. Because if you ask and you really know how to listen, your colleagues will tell you what is going on. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I've heard so many definitions of culture in my career, but for me, it's really simple. It's what happens when no one's looking. What goes on when the owner of the business, when the managers and the leaders aren't there? That's what the culture is. And how you assess it, I agree completely with Angela. You have to ask. You have to try to find some ways into the worker population and to really listen and leave your own viewpoint at the door. I think with so many small business owners, the vision and the culture and the mission is so ingrained in what they think about, and they have to really kind of park that to get under the covers and know what the culture really is.
Yeah, I think you all have really summed it up quite nicely. So it really isn't about what your business plan is or what your strategy is, what every behavior and every spoken word and every transaction your employees are doing. It's what employees and customers say about you. I can tell how our culture is working when I talk to our customers. They're really reinforcing what we're trying to say, along with asking people, what's your culture? So obviously, if you're looking for a job to enter a new employer, it would be really important to talk to employees that work there. But the other thing is to observe. I mean, just going into a location and observing. Actually, I once was recruiting for a CEO, and he came in and sat in our cafeteria for 45 minutes before his interview with the board. And he just observed how were employees talking at lunch break. What were they talking about? What was their attitude? And that was kind of how he determined that this would be a good organization for them.
So how would you ask? How do you frame that question?
There are a couple of things that come to mind for me. The Best Places to Work survey is a really good tool to use if you're interested in having something be that formal and that public. But stay interviews, are amazing to just ask a few open-ended questions and listen.
Yeah, I'm heading to Husson as soon as this is done. And I know about every third student will ask me, what is your culture? So I'm going to have to be able to give them a 20-second pitch on how to describe Bangor City's Maine culture.
What is your culture?
What is our culture?
Let's hear that 20-second pitch.
Well, it is an amazing culture, first of all.
I think it's flower shirts.
It's flower shirts. No, it's not flower shirts. It is blue. We definitely have blue. But what is very interesting is our kind of promise and our strategy is very similar to what our actual culture is. So our promise to our employees and customers are you matter more. So when you have something you matter more, it means in every conversation and every transaction that you are feeling valued, that you are feeling included, that you feel that you belong there. So being able to do that at 60 locations with 1,000 employees and hundreds of thousands of discussions and transactions. But what is so exciting for me is as I travel throughout our footprint from northern Maine, southern Maine to New Hampshire, when I walk into one of our locations, 60 locations, although they're all quite different, because of course a branch in Millinocket is going to be very different than it is on Middle Street here in Portland, but I know when I've walked in that I'm at Bangor City's Way. I can tell by the way our employees treat one another and the way they're treating our customers. So that is how I know that our culture is kind of working and that it's permeated throughout.
So I think what's really important about what you just said, David, is that it's not one thing. To look at what your culture is and try to understand your culture or to try to make cultural shifts, you need to work at it in a variety of ways. So I'll just give you a quick example. Yesterday I was working with a small business and they are thinking about starting goal setting and performance reviews. They have about 15 employees. And the owners was worried about how to conduct the performance reviews in this first year. And so one of the things I said is, well, as a rule of thumb, you want to talk about 20% of the time and you want the worker to talk about 80% of the time. And he was completely shocked and surprised by that. But if you think about that, that's how you also understand what the culture is too. It is mostly about saying nothing, and it's about listening and observing. And your comment about the CEO who went and sat in the cafeteria to try to understand what the vibe was, that's what you need to do to understand what's happening in the organization. Mm-hmm. And it's hard, especially with a small business. But taking that time, one-on-one meetings are really important. And that's also something in small businesses that I think small business owners say, well, gosh, I don't have time, or, well, I talk to them every day. But allocating 20 minutes once a week or every other week where you're dedicated to talking to an employee and understanding what their obstacles are, how you help them overcome them, that's how you start to build a culture and have some themes that really start to resonate. Also because you're listening and you're hearing more than you're talking. Mm-hmm.
And how have you seen culture play out in hiring and retention policies? Like that's sort of, I think that's what's driving so much interest in this nowadays. People and companies like WEX and IDEX and Wayfair are in these incredible ramp-up processes right now trying to hire for hundreds of jobs. I think the whole idea of culture becomes front and center in that kind of environment. So what do you see from the hiring and retention side of things?
Well, the first part, of course, is you have to know your culture. I mean, really understand it. It's not what's written.
Yeah.
It's about what you really have to offer an employee, right? So the most important thing is you have to understand your culture, and you have to be able to describe it. But then you have to hire for it, right? Once you understand who you are and what makes your organization tick, we're a bank, so we have to hire people that have integrity. We have to have people that have great confidentiality. And because we're really about people, we're looking for kind people. You know that not, if I ask the question, are you honest and kind, everyone's going to say yes. But you've worked with people who are not honest and kind, right? So really looking for just those key values. So it's really about picking people that are aligned with their personal values, are aligned with your values and your culture. And that is quite challenging, right? I mean, that can be very challenging because it obviously affects the questions we ask. So we have to design, behavioral interview questions that really get at what those core competencies are for us. We need to make sure that throughout the process, like background checks are really important. Like, is the person really who they say they are, right? That's still really, really important. And it's also, we have to remember how important the culture is to your managers. Because if your managers aren't really clear what they're expected to do, but their job is to be stewards of your culture, right? So they need to manage towards the culture. So when an employee is not behaving and is not aligned with your corporate culture, you have to have a conversation with them. And you may have to have a conversation, I don't think you're aligned with our culture, right? And it's much easier to be able to do that in an honest way because the individual will usually agree than to get into performance issues and getting into a very negative thing. It's okay not to be aligned. It's just not okay to stay and be not aligned, right? So, I think that's one of the most important parts of the recruitment part. There's lots to do with retention, but I'll let others talk.
Go ahead. Can we move on to retention?
Yeah.
All right. Because David's right. You have to find the right people and then onboard them well, stay connected to them, and then keep them. And one of the things that I like to compare this concept to is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We know that we have very basic needs that have to be met first before we can graduate up to self-actualization. At work, there are very basic things that need to be met. I've got a short list for you. People need to know, what are the expectations of me here in my job? What is my role? How clear is it? Okay, so role clarity and expectations are huge. People need to feel like they're connected to somebody at work. Do I have a friend? Or does somebody care about me here? People need to feel like they have what they need to do their job well. Do I have the equipment? Do I have the tools? Do I have the information I need to do my job well? And then they also need to feel like in the last 7 days, they need to be recognized in some way for the work they're doing. 7 days, that's a lot different than a once-a-year performance evaluation.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Angela, with absolutely everything that you said. So I think with small business owners in particular, the vision, the passion is so ingrained in them. How they share that with their employees matters. And repeating it over and over in a variety of ways, using every opportunity to communicate what's important to you. People come to work wanting to do a good job, but they need to know what that means. Establishing goals, and not in some onerous performance management oriented way, but what is it ultimately that we're trying to achieve, and how do I contribute to that? And if someone can see that direct link between what they do and how that business performs, then you're starting to get at where culture matters as it relates to retention. One of the most important things is communication. And on the thank you front, the thank yous matter, but the way you thank someone makes a difference. So saying, hey, Angela, thanks, great job, that's okay. But it's not as effective as saying, Angela, I read your monthly report, and what I thought was really interesting was X.
So being very specific.
Very specific. That's what starts to also build that culture and gets at that retention piece.
And I like to think of good job as the beginning of a conversation, not the end. How did you do that? Where can we use that elsewhere in the company? We're sort of getting a little granular here, but these are all things that build toward a strong, inclusive, productive, open culture.
I want to pick up on a theme that you mentioned before. David said, hopefully I'm paraphrasing this right, you were saying that when you're recruiting, you need to be able to articulate your culture. And I think that's true. I think that it's important not to use a lot of buzzwords and to be able to talk about your culture in a way that's very authentic and real. People want to be able to bring their whole self to work. They want to be as natural and be able to talk about their whole life. And so I think it is important to be able to articulate your culture. I'm relatively new to CEI. I spent the primary part of my career in a large corporate environment, working outside of Maine. I grew up here, moved back to Maine. I've been at CEI for about 18 months. And I was in a meeting with another community development finance institution from another part of the country, and we were sharing information. And the leader of the other group asked our group to describe our culture. And so our CEO and our president were talking about our culture. And a lot of other leaders around the table talked about the culture. And then I finally spoke up and I said, so I'm the newest person here around the table, and I'll tell you the way I define CEI's culture. And the way that I described it was different than the way that the people who'd been in the organization and the CEO and the president had described it. So I tell you that story because I would encourage everyone to really be open to asking new folks and also asking individual contributors, people who don't manage people, how they describe the culture. And then those are the words I think you use when you're recruiting.
The words of the newcomers.
Newcomers and also folks who are individual contributors.
Yeah, it should be natural, right?
Yeah.
And it's changing. Your culture is constantly changing. And because it's constantly changing, you have the ability to change it, right? So I think the advice that Angela and Cynthia just gave is really important. So understanding what motivates people at work, understanding what people need to do their best for them to reach their professional potential. You want to build that into your culture, right? What are the things that people want, right? They want to grow. They want to be part of a winning team. They want to learn and go on a journey, right? If you think about like Daniel Pink's motivation, it's really about, being able to have purpose and mastery and autonomy in your work. So when you are working on enhancing your culture, make sure that you're building that in as part of what you're about, because then it's just going to be a natural place that employees are going to want to come and work and they'll want to stay for.
Yeah.
The other part that I think employees are looking for is they're looking for a career path. Let's be fair, no one really knows at 20 or 30 or 40 or whatever what they think their next 10 years is going to be. But people do want to look ahead and say, oh, I see these digestible chunks. I see that I can achieve that. I see that there's a path here for me. And I think the path that employees are looking for as it relates to culture is this organization investing in my personal growth and development? Are they helping me learn new skills, earn credentials, where I can see there's the opportunity for a wage increase or there's an opportunity for a promotion, and in a way that is achievable in small chunks?
Yeah, growth and development.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that. I totally agree, Cynthia, in terms of the importance of ongoing development, encouragement, and opportunity. But I'm gonna have a different opinion on the career path. This is actually something I'm talking a lot to educators about, high school, colleges. we're in some ways harming our youth by forcing them to kind of come up with a major and a job. Because the bottom line is, most of us will not have one job. So so to develop our workforce thinking that one major is going to do one job, I think is going to disappoint those people, and it's definitely going to disappoint employers, right? I'm not looking for majors when I'm looking for college students. I'm looking for a really well-rounded, smart, driven person. And I want, when we bring them on board, is I want to give them all that you just said, Cynthia, development, opportunities for growth, but I'm developing for them for jobs that don't even exist today. I don't even know what kind of job titles are going to be. My job didn't exist 15 months ago at Bangor Savings Bank, but I of course had the skills and I had the readiness, and I kind of said, I'll do it. And because who wouldn't want to create their own job and write their own job description, right? But I was being prepared to do that role. So I think this is one of the things we have to be very careful about. A lot of employees do want very concrete step-by-step career paths. And I think you can do that to a degree, but I'm trying to tell our young employees, just get as broad as possible and be open to the possibilities, and don't get hung up on the job title. Get up about, is it working on your strengths? Is it something you're passionate about? And are you gonna have success? And does it help you for later in your career?
So I'm just curious, David, you're still an adjunct at Thomas College?
I just stopped doing that, but I do teach quite a bit still.
So do you say that to the college students too? Don't worry about a major, just develop as
Yeah, this is my message. I speak to a lot of junior high, high schools, and college students, and I have this wonderful group of amazing young professionals that are working me in a management training program. And when they get too ahead of themselves about their next job or their first job, real job in the organizations, I tell them, let's not worry about the next step. Let's look about making you the most well-rounded leader we can make you, so you're available to do almost anything in our bank at any time.
I think that's great advice, and I think if I look at my own career, it follows along those lines. I think that as business leaders and business owners, it's important to encourage a culture of learning and continuous growth and continuous development, and to open up opportunities for people as your business evolves. But I think that it does, it's important, right, when employees come in, for them to see that there is opportunity and that you're willing to invest in them and help them grow. And I completely agree, especially for high school kids in colleges, community college. It is about amassing skills and experiences, because we do know that jobs for the future will not look like the jobs that we have today.
So I'm just curious, we'll just take a little survey in the room. How many of you feel like you know your company's culture well enough to do a 20-second pitch? Okay, all right. So we have some work to do here. So let me then ask the next question, and that is, it's a little more granular, but how do you, especially if you're a small business, how do you get to that point? Whose responsibility is it to define culture?
That's the leader's responsibility. And then, HR is a spoke in the wheel. If you've got an HR department, great. But it really is a leadership decision that needs to be made. Draw a line in the sand that says, our business is going to achieve these things, and this is how we behave here, and this is what we want to see for values every day. And then talk about it, have conversations with everybody all the time about it. Put it on the wall. But it really has to be driven from an ownership or a high-level leadership perspective. Otherwise, the middle managers will be sort of stomped down when they want to promote the whatever the decision is that they've made. So it's got to be leadership and ownership focused, in my opinion.
Yeah, completely agree. Managers own this, but it has to come from the business owner and has to permeate absolutely everything for culture to be effective. And I think that for small business owners, sometimes it can be difficult to want to step back, or to think you have the time to step back and to think about what really does matter to the organization. And, you know, the way that we work with small businesses is to encourage them to start with just one thing and stick with that for a year. Figure out, how do you operationalize that? How do you talk about it one-on-one? How do you talk about it in a group setting? How do you talk about it externally? And how do you live that day to day? And frequently for leaders and for business owners, it means making really hard decisions. Especially when you talk about integrity, I'm sure there are decisions that have to be made to walk the talk.
So Cynthia, can you give an example of what that one thing might be from either a client or, you know, a recent experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you know, in today's environment here in Maine, as Carol said at the outset, we're in a situation of historic low unemployment rates. And many of the small businesses that we work with can be concerned about losing workers. And so frequently I hear, well, I just gave them a raise. And so I thought they were going to go, and so I just gave them another raise. And so that's okay, but it's not great. And I think establishing a culture where you are paying for performance, where you're establishing goals that stem from the vision, you're clear about what you expect, and that you have a compensation and a reward system that aligns the better performers better than the lesser performers is a good place to start. Mm-hmm. And so I was working with a business yesterday, and it's a family-run business. And the two family members don't agree on transparency of wages. And they don't necessarily agree on whether there should be profit sharing or merit increases or what have you. So they need to do an awful lot of work to get aligned around that to start to deliver on this performance-oriented culture. And so as we're working through this, I have every confidence that they're going to get there. They're really passionate about figuring this out. I would say, if you said, well, what do you think they're going to do? I think that come January, they will roll out 1 or maybe 2 goals for everybody in the organization, make them team-oriented, and announce what the merit increases will be if the organization achieves the goals and if they exceed the goals. So just putting that out there with just 1 or 2 goals, being very clear about it, posting how the organization is doing against these goals. They're yield-oriented goals, so it's relatively straightforward. So that's just one example. It's not a big business, and so they really can't take on a lot. But if at the end of the year, they've achieved everybody understanding, hey, this one thing is what really matters to the profit, and we're all going to benefit from that, that's great. And then maybe in year 2, they move to where individuals are rewarded differently. Mm-hmm. And then they also have clarity as it relates to their financial plan.
Interesting. So let's, as we promised at the outset, there are some things you can do that don't cost anything that will help establish and maintain a culture, a desirable culture for you. So can you share sort of your top 3 pieces of advice for retaining employees that don't cost anything? David, we're going to start with you.
I can do this easily because I've been using the same thing for 30 years and it's still relevant. People want to have meaningful, purposeful work, right? Mm-hmm. They want to come to work and make a difference. So that doesn't cost anything. You just need to look, though, at designing jobs, any job, every job, to make it have real purpose and have it have impact on the company or the community or the world, the customer. So purposeful work is number 1. Second is people want to be recognized. As Angela said, if people haven't heard thank you, and we really are glad you're here, in the last 7 days, you're starting to already disengage your employees. You know, at any given time, you have to remember that a third of your workforce is looking for other work. So a third of your-
Wait, what, is that really?
It's a
A
thing.
third?
It's a thing.
33%. At any given time, your workforce is open to or actively seeking jobs. So-
Is that Maine or is that in the?
No, that's
nationally?
That's national stats.
Oh,
I
boy.
don't have Maine stats.
Okay.
But I think that's really important, that there's so many opportunities, right, for your employees. There's all these amazing companies to work for in Maine. So they need to feel appreciated. They need to know their value. And third is people want to be involved in decisions, right? It's pretty easy. They don't have to be involved with the top decisions. They don't need to be making the major decisions in your organizations. But what's happening in the department? What's happening with your customers? How can you find efficiencies in one of your processes? Those three pieces of advice cost you no money. Every size organization and any type of organization can provide that to their employees.
To add to that, I have the secret. You ready for the secret? The secret is for the owner, the leaders, the managers to have a very high level of emotional intelligence. When we work on ourselves, we can then give back, listen, emote, take in, and do what we need to with our coworkers. So this is my prop for the day. If you haven't done any work on emotional intelligence for yourself, if your owner, your leader in your company wants to see things improve, it's work on yourself first.
So can you define what is emotional intelligence?
Yeah. I sure can. So let's think about IQ and EQ. IQ is our intelligence quotient. That's sort of our book smarts. Our EQ is our emotional quotient. That's our street smarts. That's how we read the room. It's how we interact with each other. It's how we process information coming in that might be critical or hurtful in some way, and then self-regulate so that we can manage through that in a way that's productive with other people. So emotional intelligence is that ability for us to be street smart and socially smart and self-regulate.
And can you learn that, or is that something that's intuitive?
I think both. You definitely, we all have a little bit of it, I hope, but you can learn it. And there are plenty of resources and articles out there to help you hone that.
It's pretty hard to change our IQ, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're pretty much
Sort of.
tested at an early age. We pretty much have the same intellect unless there's, accident or, illness that potentially changes it. But for the most part, our intelligence remains the same, but the emotional intelligence can be enhanced and grown. The other great part of EQ for me is just the kind of self-awareness and the self-discovery of that. That to me is one of the most important parts of leadership. So along with being just strong in emotional intelligence, it's about being able to continue to assess what you're good at. And one of the things you have to be assessing all the time is your culture. So good leaders are constantly assessing, is our culture what we want it to be? Is it everything we need it to be? So assessments, self-assessment is so critical for leadership. And I think EQ is a great kind of journey for people to begin that.
So stitching together a little bit about what both of you said, and thinking back to Carol's question about, what are the no-cost items that an organization can do to enhance the culture. Business owners don't absolutely know everything, and sometimes they feel they do. Asking employees what they would do differently, empowering them to make a change, really goes a long way in building ownership and building passion for an organization. Usually it is the workers who know more than anyone else how to improve a process, how to delight a customer. And so soliciting that information and then acting on it, or having the employee make that come to life, really powerful.
Very. And transparency as well is no cost. If you think about we humans, in the absence of information, we make things up. and it's not usually positive. We go right to our fears. And so if as a business, as a manager, a business owner, the more information that you can provide for the colleagues that you work with, rather than keeping it close to the vest, put it out there. Maybe you don't have all the answers yet, but being transparent builds trust. And that is no cost.
So I'm just curious, excuse me, since we're such, so we're the oldest state in the country, and we have a lot of people who are in my age group, who are boomers, who may be in senior management positions. I'm just curious, how receptive are these ideas out there in the sort of the conventional management leadership arena? I'm imagining some people I know who you would, roll these ideas out to and go, "Are you crazy?" So is this are these ideas and these concepts, are they going to be sort of the status quo, and it's what younger people, millennials and Gen Z, this is what they're looking for, and they are not going to even consider working for a company that has the old, the old dynamic? I'm just curious.
Personally, I think they'll be demanding it. So I definitely think, millennials and Gen Z are definitely going to demand it. But to be honest with you, I really think we all want to work in a healthy, positive work environment, right? I was just talking to several people my age who are very much at end of career. They've just done a startup. Because mostly they were just dealing with some really major drama and working in some toxic environments, and said, we can do better than that. So they chose to open up their own company at end of career, simply because, and they've lost quite a bit of income by doing this, but for them it was so important to work in a healthy environment where they're really working a congenial way, really building something together in a really positive thing, and then going home and actually enjoying their life and not worrying about work.
And were they thinking they couldn't do that in the positions they had previously?
I definitely think there are some professions and some industries that are probably pretty toxic across the industry.
Yeah.
So I think those industries are really going to be challenged with this labor shortage in terms of you're not going to be able to do this in the future and get good talent.
Yeah, to your point, Carol, at KMA we work with multiple clients, companies, and industries. And we see the gamut. We see the companies, the business owners who are not willing to change. They want things done their way. This is their culture. I've recently worked with a client with almost 40% turnover.
Wow.
That's a lot of turnover. And we can do what we can do by pointing that out and saying this is how it will benefit you to shift the culture and the thinking a little bit. But the business owner or the top level leader has to be willing to change that. Conversely, we work with companies who get it. All of these no-cost things that we've listed 6 so far, they do them. And they're thriving and they're growing. One company in particular that I can think of has openings for positions, but it's because of growth.
Yeah. I work primarily with startup businesses, and what I'm finding is that, to the point you made about your colleagues who have gone off and done startups, is that there's a passion for wanting to create a fair and engaging environment. Sometimes the small business owners are so focused on their product or their service and getting everything off the ground, they're looking for some pointers, they're looking for some help, they're looking for some guidance, and that's what folks like us help them with. They understand that it is their responsibility, and they want to build a culture that people want to be in every day.
Great.
So right now, it seems that there's a ton of merger and acquisition activity that's happening in the banking industry, it's happening in the news industry, it's happening with a lot of tech firms and some service providers. So I'm just curious, how do you manage a situation where you have competing cultures or cultures that aren't aligned, but now everybody's under one corporate umbrella, and you need to get buy-in into whichever culture is going to be the one going forward?
Yeah, we went through a recent acquisition And my role at the time was Director of HR for Bangor Savings Bank. And I spent 6 months before the acquisition working with employees, working with customers, and working with the communities in these branches in New Hampshire, just really being open and honest about this is our culture, this is what we do. We understood their culture. I was figuring out what their culture was, showing them where it was very similar, showing it where it was very different. Trying to just really be honest, and then giving them an option. Do you want to stay or do you want to go? And if they wanted to go, we gave them a really strong financial incentive to do that, because we really wanted them to buy in and believe in our culture. But we're really pleased, because it usually takes several years after acquisition before the cultures are even closely merged. But we really believe that it was just a few months after the acquisition that we really had one culture. And the vast majority of people who decided to stay are still with us 2 years later, and they have clearly fit into the culture. But you have to be totally open and honest, and you do, I believe, need to give some of those employees an option out if it doesn't sound like it's something that they want to do.
So the fact that Bangor had you as a point person to do that is probably the way that came together. What happens if is it imperative that if you're merging with another company, you free someone up to do exactly what you did, David?
To free somebody up, or to hire someone like Angela to come in and understand your culture and then kind of represent you. So, but I think it's best done internally. But you can always hire consultants, but we did very little. We used very little consultants in our acquisition, even though a lot of our leaders had not been through an acquisition. But we just were so confident that our culture was one that would resonate in New Hampshire and would resonate with employees and customers in New Hampshire. And after just a couple of years, it's really thriving.
Yeah, in my experience, prior to coming to CEI, I did quite a bit of work with mergers and acquisitions, and the people part of an acquisition is the most difficult and most crucial part of the acquisition. And so in my experience, what works really well is to set up teams of people from both organizations at the department level, and to have complete transparency on what the process is for integration. And also to have a very transparent and open process about how leadership will be determined, how positions will be filled, and people are always worried, will I lose my job? And so being very clear about that. I also think at the outset, when you're bringing together organizations, whether it's a merger of equals or whether it's more of an acquisition environment, be very clear about why the transaction was occurring. Was it an aspect of the brand? Was it a customer base? Was it a product or a service? Or, what is it that combined makes the entity stronger than the individual pieces, and continually reminding people about that as you shape the culture. To David's point, in my experience, it is always a multi-year process. And I think at a certain point, leadership does need to turn the corner and be quite diligent about articulating language in a consistent fashion, and quite diligent about what the culture needs to be. But in those early days, I believe in having folks from both organizations coming together to shape the future. That's how you get that buy-in.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times too, we in HR might see, or middle management might see that the culture needs a shift because of an acquisition or merger, but the people above us aren't seeing it. And so I think our role can be to bring data, bring information, bring some suggestions about what they can potentially consider as the leader to help shift the culture to be more productive and positive. I think sometimes the leaders may be a little removed from it, and they need, information from you and from the working group.
Yeah, I think that it's important to know. as I sort of alluded to, why did you buy this business? And you want to make sure that as you integrate that you don't lose that. I was working with a business in the pharmaceutical sector, a very successful, conservative, highly profitable pharmaceutical business. Their R&D pipeline had really dried up. And so they acquired an innovative, hot Silicon Valley organization, much smaller than the larger business. And so as they looked to bring those cultures together, it was really important that the innovation of the acquired business and that mindset and that way that they were able to develop products, that be integrated in and infiltrate the larger pharmaceutical organization.
How'd that go?
Well, I think it's you know, I think they really struggled with it, you know, for a good 2 years. There was a fair amount of resistance in the business that bought the California business, and it took a lot of focus from a lot of people to try to get the balance of the culture right. And I think the way that it ended up, they have hubs of innovation that are primarily filled from the folks from the acquired business. Another way you can think about it too is, as I mentioned before, as you bring together people from different organizations, is figure out how do you cross-pollinate. If you do end up with multiple locations, which happens in larger organizations, making sure that you've got leadership presence at the newly acquired site, and then also workers from the acquired site working in the headquarters, if you will. Those are some things that can help to cross-pollinate.
Carol, I think it's also, we need to remember it's not just through acquisition. We have to be working on our culture every day, right? I report to a chief experience officer. The head of HR reports to the same person. The community relations reports to the same person. Our community or our customer experience group reports to the same person. So we are constantly looking throughout our entire organization, when are we aligned with this culture and when are we seeing signs that we're not? And I can just tell you, even great culture. So I really work for a great culture. I mean, 95% of our employees are fully engaged, which is pretty exciting. However, bad things still happen in great cultures, right? And I think this is really important. And sometimes we have surprises. So here's a really great example of how our strong culture had a negative effect. So we last year decided that we were going to put all of our employees through 4 hours of bystander training on harassment and bullying, because we really wanted to make sure we were providing a safe environment for our employees. We thought we were, but we wanted to go that extra step to give them more and to just have a voice in terms of keeping themselves safe. When we were doing the self-discovery work with an outside consultant, I heard some of our frontline people say, you know, we get hit on all the time by our customers. And I'm like, what? I'm the head of HR. I mean, I knew of a few situations that were happening. And so, but after just hearing a few people say this in self-discovery calls, I literally went out and visited probably 15 of our branches, and I asked the employees there, in our self-discovery, we heard that some of our customers are being disrespectful to you all. Is that happening in your branch? And everyone started laughing, going, yeah. I'm like, well, how frequently is that happening? And they're like, at least on a weekly basis. Then I went to the managers and said, why are we letting this happen? And the response was kind of like, well, that's what I kind of put up with. So it was kind of like, this is a hazard of being a frontline person in banking. And this was really unknown to top leadership. It was, and I visit these branches, it was kind of unknown to me. So our culture, the customer's always right, and do everything you can for the customer. In this case, started doing harm to our employees. So in our training, I had to stand up to all 1,000 employees and say, the customer is right unless they're being disrespectful to you or they're causing you harm. And then we need to talk to them. And so that was why that program was so successful, because we found something we really didn't know. And it was being caused by a strong customer culture. But because we were able to discover it and we were able to act upon it, then employees started feeling comfortable coming forward. And we have said goodbye to some customers who didn't want to treat our employees with respect.
So who confronts the disrespectful customer?
Well, again, the way that the bystander training works is the individual themselves can. You can delegate it to someone in management or HR. Or the other strategy is distract, so probably that's not going to work. Because that's kind of what they were doing. What we were finding the solution is that managers would remove kind of the targeted employee from the person that came in every Wednesday morning. So they would kind of remove them from the line and they would go and take care of the customer. But that, of course, is not resolving the situation. So I think the only two ways is the individual themselves, one of their coworkers, their manager, or someone from management. And generally, we've had management go in and talk to these customers.
What an amazing example of true listening,
Yeah.
right?
But it's also a really good example of how culture can have
Yes.
unintended consequence. So that's why it's so important to continue to be watching and listening and asking questions, because good culture doesn't always mean every outcome and result will be positive.
So you matter more unless you're a jerk. I like that.
Yeah, but you
Yes, yes. Okay, so I think we've come to the time when we're going to start taking some questions. Anybody out there with a question they want to get the ball rolling? Just would you mind coming up to the microphone, please? Go right ahead.
My name is Kathleen, and thank you very much. It's very interesting. I'd like to ask a question to David based on the last conversation we just had. You had said in that culture discovery that middle managers, some were aware, but they had said, oh, but that's just what we've had to deal with, and that's just part of the job. How do you address that? So how do you address that previous generation? Right, so I look at in terms of women in leadership, right? Oh, well, that's just what you had to do. So suck it up, buttercup, do it. So how do you address that and say, well, that's what it was, and here's what you need to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, not only are we dealing with the cultures of our companies, we're dealing with all of these years of socialization, right? So, I mean, I'm having these conversations all the time in my role as diversity officer for the bank. So, I mean, I'm still working with people my age to understand, you know, there's not just a male and female anymore. There's something in between, right? It's not just gay and straight. There are 60, orientations in between. So, again, we're working not only against cultures in our own organizations. Well, every organization you work for is part of your socialization, and just what you've experienced throughout your lifetime is affecting who you are. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to unwind. I mean, what we simply said to managers going, we're so sorry you had to experience this. However, our belief is you matter more. That starts with our employees, and we have to take care of our employees. We have to, because if those people day after day are dealing with unkind customers, they're going to leave our organization. So they're going to not do the right thing. So we just kind of go back to our culture, and we just kind of continue to find examples to have real conversation. So I feel like part of correcting, self-correcting culture, I think part of getting people to be more open to a more diverse workforce is just constant conversation. So I feel like when I hear the conversations happening and I see some progress being made, then I'm feeling good. It's when I don't hear people talking about it that concerns me.
Yeah, I can actually add something to that. So in a prior job, I discovered about 6 or 8 months after the fact that an employee had done something inappropriate with a client. And there had been 2 senior managers in that meeting and witnessed the inappropriate behavior. And when it finally came to me, and the customer had not wanted me to find out, and when it came to me and took care of the employee, I personally, and I was the head of this business, so I personally met with the 2 senior women who were in the meeting and said, look, times have changed, and I understand this may have happened when you were coming up through the ranks, and maybe for me too. But here's where we are today, and it is not acceptable that this employee did this. There's no way that it's okay. But what is really not okay is that you didn't tell me. What is really not okay is that this customer had this horrible thing happen. Word spread throughout the customer organization, so it was detrimental to the business, but it also really reflected poorly on us. So I took a very, very firm stance with those managers who were in the room. And I think that it's the responsibility of leaders, even if it's a really hard decision. That's the only way we make progress on culture.
Well, will you please join me in thanking our panelists this morning?